A sommelier reads a room the way a surgeon reads an X-ray, not by looking at what's there, but by looking for what shouldn't be. Sabine Dufresne had spent 8 years learning that lesson in the wine cellar of the Kingsley Hotel, and by the time she was 27, she was very good at it. She could tell a nervous man from a confident one by the way he held his glass. She could smell a lie as easily as she could smell a corked bottle, and she had learned, above all, that the most dangerous people in any dining room were the ones who ordered carefully. Dante Benedetti ordered carefully. She had known him for 3 years, or known of him, which was a different thing entirely. He came in every second Thursday, always the same table by the east window, always a glass of aged Barolo before the kitchen even had a chance to offer a menu. He tipped well and spoke little, which made him either a gentleman or a predator. In Sabine's experience, in a city like Toronto, those categories had significant overlap. It was 11:30 on a Wednesday when she heard the service elevator open behind her. She was relabeling the back inventory, a task the junior staff always forgot to finish, and she didn't turn around immediately. She already knew who it was. She recognized the particular weight of his footsteps, the pause he always made in a new space, cataloging exits. "Mr. Benedetti," she said, turning. "We're closed." "I know." He stopped a few feet behind her. She could hear him but not see him, and she suspected he'd calculated that deliberately. "I need to speak with you." She set down the label gun. She turned around. He looked terrible. Not in any obvious way. The suit was still perfect, the jaw still clean-shaven, the posture still carved from something harder than bone. But she had spent 3 years watching his face across candlelit tables, and she could see the exhaustion that lived behind his eyes the way dust lives behind a painting. "The restaurant's closed," she said more gently this time. "This isn't about the restaurant." He told her then, standing between the oak racks and the temperature control unit, in that particular flat voice men like him used when they were asking for something they'd never had to ask for before. "There was a dinner. Tomorrow night. The Galveston family. Old money, north end of the city, fingers in everything from Rosedale real estate to the container yards at the port." He had told Harmon Galveston, the patriarch, that he was engaged. He had said it 2 months ago, in a room full of people who were better at remembering things than forgetting them. And now Harmon was hosting a family dinner specifically to vet the woman Dante had described. "The woman I described," Dante said, "was composed, intelligent. Someone who understood my world without belonging to it." Sabine looked at him for a long moment. "And you've run out of candidates," she said. "I've run out of people I trust. I'm your sommelier. You're the only person in this building who has ever told me to my face that I was wrong about a wine." His mouth moved almost. "You were right, incidentally." She had been. He'd insisted on pairing a heavy Amarone with the fish course. She'd told him it would overwhelm the halibut. He'd ordered it anyway. He hadn't complained when she was right, which she'd noticed. $20,000, Dante said. "1 evening. You eat dinner, you answer questions, you don't freeze." Sabine crossed her arms. The cellar was cold and the money was extraordinary, and none of that was why her pulse had shifted. "I don't perform," she said. "Excuse me. If I walk into that house, I walk in as myself. I don't recite a script, I don't defer to you in public, and if someone at that table says something wrong, I will say so." She held his gaze. "I've spent 8 years making difficult men comfortable in rooms they shouldn't feel comfortable in. I'm good at it, but I don't do it by disappearing. I do it by knowing exactly what I'm doing. If you want a prop, call an agency. If you want someone who will actually get you through that dinner, those are my terms." The silence stretched. The temperature control unit hummed. "Deal," Dante said. The dress was the color of winter birch bark. Pale gray silk with a narrow, clean silhouette that belonged at a gallery opening rather than a crime family's dining room, which was precisely why it worked. Subtle enough for old money. Sharp enough to hold its own. Sabine stood in the guest suite of Dante's penthouse on King Street West and pinned her dark hair back from her face in a way that said I didn't try too hard, which had taken her 15 minutes to achieve. The room was tasteful, expensive, and entirely impersonal, and she thought about what it said about him that he kept a guest room this well-appointed and apparently never had guests. He was waiting in the foyer when she came out. He wore a charcoal suit that fit him the way good suits fit men who are never surprised. Precisely, without forgiveness. He looked at her once, briefly, and something shifted in the set of his jaw. "Ring," he said. She'd expected it. He produced a box velvet, no fuss, and inside was a band of pale rose gold set with a single emerald-cut stone, simple and cold and flawless, not a ring that shouted, a ring that waited. He reached for her left hand. His were warm, which surprised her, and slightly rough at the knuckle, which did not. "It fits," she said when it slid on without resistance. "You wear a silver ring on your right index finger. I know the width." He released her hand. "I notice things." She filed that away. In the car, a black sedan with a partition and a driver named Henk, who looked at her in the rearview mirror with the particular expression of a man who had learned not to have expressions, Dante laid out the narrative. Financial consultant. 6 months together, met at a fundraiser for the ROM. She'd knocked a glass of red wine toward his shoes and told him she was sorry, but she wouldn't pay for them because he should have been standing 3 feet to the left. "That's not bad," Sabine said. "I have people who write these things. The detail about the 3 feet is good. It sounds like something I'd actually say." Dante looked at her sideways. "That is something you'd actually say." "I know." She looked out at the city streaming past, the lake just visible in the distance, black and flat and enormous. "What do I need to know about the Galvestons?" He told her. Harmon Galveston, 71, had built his legitimate fortune in industrial logistics and spent the last 4 decades using that infrastructure for less legitimate purposes. He was the kind of man who believed in family optics the way other men believed in religion. Absolutely, and dangerously. His wife Constance would assess Sabine's manners the way a jeweler assessed a stone, looking for flaws, not qualities. Their son Torben ran the family's newer operations and would try to intimidate her simply because that was how Torben interacted with everything. And then there was the daughter. "Isolde handles their legitimate business fronts," Dante said. His voice shifted just slightly, the way it did when he was being careful. "She's been doing it since she was 24. She also manages the contracts for the arrangement I'm trying to close with Harmon, which means she is the actual person in that room whose opinion matters. And she'll try to break me. She'll try to read you." He paused. "Isolde doesn't destroy things. She assesses them." Sabine thought about that. "What's the deal you're closing?" "Access to Galveston's port infrastructure. It streamlines my import operations significantly." "Legally?" He looked at her. She looked back. "Partly," he said. The estate in Rosedale sat at the end of a long private drive lined with maples that in another month would be bare and skeletal. Tonight they still held their autumn color, deep rust and gold in the sweep of the headlights. The house was a century-old brick manor, Georgian revival, maintained with the aggressive care of people who understood that neglected things were eventually taken from you. Harmon Galveston was already in the entrance hall. He was shorter than Sabine had expected, and wider, and there was something in the way he occupied the space, a gravitational quality, a sense of absolute ownership, that made the marble foyer feel smaller than it was. His eyes found Sabine immediately, the way a scale finds the heaviest point. Dan smiled. It was not a warm smile, it was a functional one, and this must be Sabine. "Mr. Galveston." She didn't extend her hand and wait, she extended it as a statement. He shook it. His grip was deliberate. "Dante tells us you work in finance." "Asset management," she said, "private clients." She smiled, the sort who sign NDAs before they sign anything else. "Discreet. I respect that." The dining room smelled of wood smoke and beeswax and the specific kind of formality that costs real money to maintain. Constance Galveston sat at Harmon's right hand wearing pearls that were clearly not decorative. Torben was across from Sabine, broad-shouldered, restless, already looking at her the way people look at things they're planning to undermine. And at the far end, in a charcoal blazer with her dark hair cut close to her jaw, was Isolde. Sabine recognized her immediately. Not the face, she'd never seen her before, but the type, the woman in the room who was running 4 calculations for everyone that anyone else was running, and showing none of them. The wine arrived first, as it always did, a white burgundy to start, poured correctly, nothing unusual. Then the red when the main course came, a Bordeaux, poured from a bottle that Harmon held up briefly with proprietary satisfaction. 1989 Pauillac, Harmon said. "A gift from an associate in Lyon. You'll notice the depth." Sabine lifted the glass. She swirled it, brought it to her nose, and for one very still second, she was certain. The color was wrong. Not dramatically, not obviously, but she had spent 8 years in the angled light of a cellar, and the brick-orange rim of a 1989 was a specific shade, sun-faded and complex. This was brighter, younger, and the nose had a freshness that a wine of that age should not have had, a fruit-forwardness that belonged to something 5, perhaps 8 years old at most. Someone had refilled the bottle. She set the glass down. She said nothing. She took a measured sip and smiled when Harmon looked at her. "Remarkable," she said. "You've kept it beautifully." Constance asked about the wedding. Torben asked about Dante's dock operations in a way dressed as small talk. Sabine answered her questions and let Dante handle his. At one point, Isolde said very quietly across the table, "Tell me, Sabine, how do you approach a situation where the information you have is incomplete? In your field, I mean." It was a test, clean, surgical. Sabine met her eyes. "I trust what I can verify," she said, "and I stay very still with what I can't until I can. People who act on incomplete information make noise. Noise gets expensive." "What do you verify first?" "What's right in front of me," Sabine said. "The room, the table. What people pour for themselves versus what they pour for guests." Something moved in Isolde's expression. Not quite respect, but recognition. "You have good instincts," Isolde said. "I have good training," Sabine said. "It amounts to the same thing." In the car going back, Dante was quiet for the first 2 minutes. Then he said, "You told her you trust what you can verify." "Yes." "What was it you verified at that table?" Sabine looked at the city lights, the 401 pulling them south and east. "The wine Harmon served us as a 1989 Pollack was not a 1989 Pollack," she said. "Someone had refilled the bottle. I'd guess the actual contents were around 2014, maybe 2016. It's a common fraud in private cellars. Buy one impressive label, keep the glass, top it up indefinitely." Dante turned to look at her. In the dim light of the sedan, his face was very still. "How certain are you?" "Completely." She folded her hands in her lap. The ring caught the light from a passing street lamp. "I've been identifying mislabeled wine for 8 years. It's not a skill, it's a reflex." "The Galvestons have a wine authentication business," Dante said slowly. "They authenticate and resell private cellar collections through a subsidiary in Lyon." The car went quiet. "That would be a very elegant fraud," Sabine said carefully, "if someone in that business were also quietly substituting contents while keeping original labels." "Yes," Dante said, "it would." He looked at her for a long moment. "Keep the ring on," he said. "The job isn't done." She moved into the guest suite 3 days later. It felt strange, occupying a space that had no record of her in it, no books with cracked spines, no half-empty mug on the windowsill, nothing that said a person lives here. She unpacked her overnight bag, placed her own ring back on her right hand, and left Dante's ring on the nightstand. She didn't put it back on until he came home at 11 that night and told her about her brother. She had not told Dante about Idris. She'd kept that part of herself sealed away with the practiced care of someone who'd learned young that vulnerabilities, shared carelessly, became weapons in other people's hands. But Dante had people, and his people had found Idris in 72 hours. Idris Dufresne, 24, had worked for 8 months as a bar manager at a restaurant in the West End. A restaurant, it turned out, that ran its books through a Galveston-affiliated holding company. Idris had borrowed money from the wrong man. Stig, a low-level operator who handled cash advances for the family. And when Idris couldn't repay on time, Stig had threatened to tell his employer about the debt, which would have cost Idris his job, his references, and quite possibly more than that. "He's not in physical danger," Dante said, sitting at the kitchen island with his jacket off and his sleeves rolled up. "But he will be if this isn't resolved quickly. Stig answers to Torben." Sabine sat very still across from him. The countertop was cold under her hands. "How much does he owe?" 12,000. "I can pay that." "The money isn't the problem anymore." Dante looked at her directly. "Torben knows your face now. He knows you're connected to me. If he does enough searching, and he will, because that's what Torben does, he'll find out that you work at a hotel, not a consulting firm. And then he'll find Idris. And then he'll have leverage over me through you." Sabine said nothing. "I need 3 months," Dante said. "Enough time to close the port arrangement with Harmon and establish enough mutual interest that Torben attacking you becomes too costly for the family. In 3 months, you're protected. Idris is protected. I settle his debt immediately and move him somewhere Stig can't reach him." He paused. "I'll pay you $60,000, and I'll hire a service so you never have to stand in a cellar relabeling inventory again." "I like the cellar," Sabine said very quietly. Sabine. She looked at the ring on the nightstand. She thought about Idris at 24, trying to make rent in a city that ate people who didn't have enough cushion beneath them. She thought about their mother who had died when Sabine was 20 and Idris was 17, leaving them both with nothing but each other and a very specific understanding of how alone could feel. She picked up the ring and put it on. "Idris is out by Friday," she said, "and you cover his rent for 3 months while he finds something clean." Dante nodded once. "And I keep my shifts at the Kingsley," she said. "This arrangement borrows my life. It doesn't take it." "Understood." Isolde came on a Thursday afternoon, unannounced, with a box of butter tarts from a bakery on Queen Street West. Sabine opened the door herself. The building's front desk had called up, so she'd had 40 seconds to become someone who belonged here, which this wasn't, but which she intended it to appear to be. "You're checking whether I actually live here," Sabine said, putting the kettle on. "My father asked me to drop these off," Isolde had said. She was looking at the bookshelves. Sabine had reorganized them 2 days ago. She'd known someone would come. "Your father doesn't send butter tarts," Sabine said. "He sends lawyers." Isolde turned from the shelf and smiled, and it was the first genuine expression Sabine had seen from her. "You're not at all what I expected." "What did you expect?" "Someone decorative, someone Dante had selected for smoothness." Isolde set her coat over the back of a chair, unhurried. "He's always preferred people who are easy to manage." Sabine poured the tea. "And I don't seem easy to manage." "You identified that wine at dinner." The room got very still. "I could see it in your face, just for a second. Most people wouldn't have caught it. But you caught it, and then you decided not to say anything, and I've been thinking about that decision for a week." Sabine set a cup in front of her. She sat down across the island and looked at Isolde Galveston the way she looked at a bottle she wasn't sure about, carefully, without committing. "I said what I said at dinner," Sabine told her. "I trust what I can verify, and I stay still with the rest. Until you can't. Until I don't have to." Isolde wrapped both hands around the cup. For the first time, she looked like something other than a calculation. She looked like someone who was very tired of being the only person in every room who was paying attention. "My brother is going to cause problems," Isolde said quietly. "He has an interest in your brother's situation." "I know. I want you to understand that I'm not my brother." Sabine studied her. "Why are you telling me this?" Isolde looked up. "Because you didn't expose that wine at dinner. You had every reason to. It would have embarrassed my father, given Dante leverage, shifted the entire negotiation. And you didn't. You filed it away instead." She paused. "I respect that kind of restraint. I don't encounter it often." Sabine said nothing. "Watch Torben at the christening," Isolde said, and stood. "He'll approach you when Dante's occupied. He'll have something on your brother." She pulled on her coat. "I can't stop him, but I wanted you to be ready." St. Andrew's Presbyterian Church on King Street was full of people who looked like they were attending a funeral they had organized themselves. The christening was for Harmon's first grandchild, Torben's infant daughter, and the whole affair had the weight of a state occasion pressed into Sunday clothes. Sabine wore black, which was appropriate for a christening, and also for what she suspected the afternoon might require. Dante sat beside her in the pew, his hand covering hers on the wooden bench in the same quiet way he'd done at the dinner. Not possessive, not performed, grounding. "Idris is in Halifax," he murmured, lips barely moving. "Clean apartment, no connection to anything here. He's safe." She turned her hand over and held his. The reception after was in the church hall, rearranged into something approximating elegance. Sabine stayed close to Dante for the first 40 minutes, and then he was pulled aside by Harmon and 2 other men she didn't recognize, and she was, briefly, alone. Torben found her at the drinks table. He was bigger up close than across a dinner table. He had his father's eyes, the functional, assessing quality, but none of his father's patience. He stood slightly too close, a deliberate choice, and smiled in a way that didn't reach anything. Sabine. Her name in his mouth had the feel of something being picked up and turned over. "I've been looking into you." "I assumed you would be," she said pleasantly. That slowed him. He'd expected nerves. "You work at a hotel," he said. "You're a sommelier." "Yes." "Not a financial consultant." "No." He blinked. She hadn't flinched, which was apparently not in his script. "So you're not what you said you were." "I'm exactly what I said I was," Sabine said. "I said I manage assets for high net worth individuals. I do. Some of them drink very expensive wine." She looked at him steadily. "Your father has a remarkable cellar, by the way." Something moved in Torben's face. "The 1989 Pauillac," she continued. Her voice perfectly level, perfectly friendly. The voice she used when someone sent back a bottle and she needed to handle it without making a scene. "Is a beautiful bottle. Extraordinary condition for its age." She paused. "Though I'd be curious what a master of wine at the LCBO would make of the fill level, and the sediment pattern, and the particular brightness of the fruit on the nose." She tilted her head. "Those things are very hard to fake with old wine, for someone without the training." Torben said nothing. "Your family's wine authentication subsidiary does beautiful work, I understand," Sabine said. "It would be a shame if someone started asking questions about provenance documentation. Those audits can take months." She picked up her glass. but I'm sure everything is completely in order." The silence between them was the specific kind that precedes a shift in weight. "What do you want?" Torben said very quietly. "I want my brother left alone," Sabine said. "I want Stig to forget he exists, and I want your father and Dante to close their arrangement by the end of the month so everyone can move forward productively." She smiled. "That's all. Nothing complicated." Torben looked at her for a long moment, then he stepped back. "You're not what I expected," he said. "No, I rarely am." She told Dante on the way home, all of it, the bottle at dinner, what she'd said to Torben, the bluff that was only partly a bluff. He listened without interrupting, which was something she had come to understand was his version of absolute attention. When she finished, the car was quiet for a moment. "Then, you threatened a Galveston with a wine fraud allegation." I presented a hypothetical. In front of the drinks table at his own family's christening. "Quietly," she said, "the way you'd handle a mislabeled bottle. No fuss, no scene." Another silence. "The LCBO Master of Wine, is that real?" "She's a colleague. She owes me a favor." Sabine looked out the window. "I haven't called her. I wasn't lying about what I could see in that bottle, but I have no documentation." She paused. "Torben doesn't know that." Dante said very quietly, "Sabine." "You're terrifying." She looked at him. His eyes were dark and tired and lit from inside with something she hadn't seen there before. "I'm a sommelier," she said. "I just know how to read what's in a glass." He reached out and covered her hand where it rested on the seat between them, and this time it wasn't for anyone's benefit. There was no one watching. The partition was up, and it was just the two of them in the dark, and his thumb traced the line of her knuckles in a way that had nothing to do with performance. "Harmon called me during the reception," he said. "Torben told him there was no issue. The arrangement closes Friday." She exhaled. "Idris is safe," he said. "It's done." She turned her hand over and held his in the dark, and looked at the ring on her finger catching the orange light of the street lamps, and didn't say anything for a long time. "The 3 months," she said eventually. "Yes." "They don't have to apply," she said carefully, "if the situation has already resolved." Dante was quiet. "What I mean," Sabine said, "is that the contract was specific. 3 months in exchange for safety and compensation. The safety's been arranged, the compensation I've accepted." She looked at him. "The contract is complete." "Yes," he said. "So the ring should probably come off." He didn't say anything. She looked down at her hand, at the pale rose gold and the clean, cold stone. She thought about the way that he had noticed the width of the ring on her index finger, without her ever knowing he'd looked. She thought about the way he listened, really listened, the kind of listening that meant he heard the things she chose not to say. She thought about the 40 seconds she'd had to prepare herself before Isolde knocked on that door, and how she had not been afraid. She had been, she realized, in her own particular way at home. "I'll keep it on," she said, "if you can give me a reason that has nothing to do with a contract." Dante looked at her for a long moment. The city moved past the windows. The lake was somewhere out there in the dark, enormous and still. "Stay," he said. It was a single word, undecorated, offered without performance or transaction. "Not for 3 months, not for any of this, just stay." Sabine Dufresne, who had spent 8 years learning to read what was really in a glass, looked at the man beside her and found nothing she did not trust. She kept the ring on.